In the heart of a bustling city called Green Hollow, a packed courthouse held its breath. The biggest case in recent memory was underway. Franklin Dale, a well-known philanthropist and CEO, stood trial for allegedly misusing millions intended for local orphanages and community aid. Every seat in courtroom 3 was filled. Reporters scribbled feverishly while townsfolk leaned forward, barely blinking. At the bench presided Judge Lenora Briggs, a no-nonsense woman with decades of legal experience etched into the lines of her stern expression. Her gavel rested close, ready to silence any chaos. Franklin sat coldly at the defense table, flanked by his sharp-suited legal team. Across from him stood District Attorney Camille Rourke, preparing to deliver the final blow in a months-long investigation. The stakes were enormous. Then, something completely unexpected happened. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. At first, no one paid it much mind, just latecomers perhaps. But soon, the soft padding of paws across the tiled floor drew attention. Gasps erupted as a ragged, thin dog walked confidently into the room. Its fur was patchy, its ribs visible, but its eyes shone with unmistakable focus. The courtroom fell silent. Even Judge Briggs, mid-sentence, paused. The dog, some sort of German shepherd mix, stepped calmly into the center aisle, turned to face the defendant, and let out a sharp, echoing bark. The bailiff, Officer Harding, took a hesitant step forward, unsure whether to remove the animal or wait. Before he could act, the dog barked again, louder. Its gaze never left Franklin Dale. The third bark rang through the room like a gavel itself. Then it sat. The air shifted. Franklin twitched in his seat. His hands, previously calm, clenched the edge of the table. Whispers buzzed among spectators. What's it doing? Is it trained? Why is it barking at him? Judge Briggs lifted her gavel but froze when Harding gasped. There's a key, the bailiff stammered, pointing. Around the dog's collar, a rusted bronze key dangled, catching the light with a faint shimmer. All movement halted. Even the judge stared, eyes narrowed. A key, she said slowly. Officer Harding, secure the animal, and that key. Harding approached with care. The dog didn't move, simply wagging its tail as if pleased with itself. The bailiff unclipped the key and held it up. The room leaned in. A storage key, maybe? Camille Rourke murmured to her assistant. Briggs looked at the defense. Mr. Dale, do you recognize this? The accused's face was stone. I have no idea what that mutt is doing here. But the dog didn't seem finished. It stood again, walked straight to Franklin, and sat just feet away. It gave a low, deliberate growl. Franklin leaned away, his facade cracking. This is outrageous, barked his lead counsel, Victor Wren. A dog waltzes in and suddenly we're chasing keys? Remove it immediately. Enough, Briggs snapped. We'll handle this properly. Camille Rourke stood. Your Honor, I request permission to examine the key. It may be connected to the case. Judge Briggs nodded once. Harding handed the key to the DA. Camille turned it over in her hands, her brow rising. This marking here, she said, holding the key up, matches the insignia of Everlock Storage, a secure facility linked to Mr. Dale's shell companies. More murmurs rippled. This is absurd, Wren repeated, his voice rising with desperation. Judge Briggs banged the gavel. Quiet in the court. Camille didn't hesitate. Your Honor, I'm filing for an immediate warrant to search the unit this key may unlock. It could contain materials related to the fraud investigation. Wren exploded. You're basing legal action on a dog? The judge stared at him coolly. If your client has nothing to hide, there should be no issue. Miss Rourke, your request is granted. Officer Harding, accompany her. Secure that facility. Camille clutched the key and nodded. She turned to leave, casting one last glance at the dog. It wagged its tail. Franklin Dale's face had gone ashen. He whispered furiously to Wren, who looked equally unsettled. Judge Briggs rose. Court will recess until further notice. Officer Harding, see to the dog. Make sure it's fed and cared for. As people began to exit, the courtroom buzzed louder than ever. Where did it come from? Why did it bark at Franklin? What's in that storage unit? Judge Briggs lingered at the bench, staring at the door where the dog had entered. Her mind raced. This wasn't just unusual. It felt orchestrated, fated even. And as the dog was gently led out, tail wagging, no one could deny the truth. Something had changed. Outside the courthouse, the early afternoon sun blazed overhead, but District Attorney Camille Rourke barely noticed. She clutched the rusted bronze key in her hand like it was a live wire. Officer Harding kept pace beside her as they crossed the street toward her government-issued sedan. Camille's mind was a whirlwind. A dog had just walked into the courtroom, pointed to the defendant with nothing but instinct, or something deeper, and handed them what could be the case-breaking lead they'd been searching for. Within 20 minutes, Camille and Harding arrived at Everlock Storage, a gray concrete compound surrounded by tall metal fencing. The place looked as soulless as the man she was investigating. Inside, a wiry clerk with white stubble and thick glasses blinked in confusion as Camille presented the warrant. "You say a dog gave you this key?" he asked incredulously. Camille nodded. "That's correct." He muttered under his breath, "Well, I've heard everything now." The clerk led them down a narrow hallway of storage units. They stopped at Unit 117B, a heavy steel door with a digital padlock and a backup key slot. Camille inserted the key and heard a soft click. The door creaked open. The interior was pitch black. Harding flicked on his flashlight. The beam swept across rows of file boxes, neatly stacked, labeled, untouched by time. Camille stepped in slowly. She opened one of the boxes and immediately froze. Inside were contracts, balance sheets, offshore transaction records, and private memos, a paper trail of corruption that painted Franklin Dale as far worse than they'd even suspected. This is everything," she whispered. Harding raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" She handed him a document. "Look at the dates, the shell companies. It's all here. Dale's entire scam on paper." As Camille snapped photos and collected evidence back in the courtroom, Judge Lenora Briggs remained at her bench, unusually still. The earlier scene with the dog kept replaying in her mind. Not just its behavior, but the reaction it sparked in Franklin Dale. His eyes had widened, his body stiffened. That wasn't annoyance. That was fear. In the adjacent private conference room, Franklin paced like a caged animal. His attorney, Victor Wren, tried to keep him calm. "How the hell did that dog know?" Franklin muttered, half to himself. Victor shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe a coincidence." "No," Franklin snapped. "That storage key should have been gone. No one knew about that unit." Victor leaned forward, voice low. "You listen to me. We might still have a chance to suppress that evidence depending on how it's handled." Franklin wasn't convinced. Back at the Everlock facility, Camille collected several boxes and handed them off to Harding. "We bring this straight to Judge Briggs." When they returned to the courthouse, the crowd inside had only grown. News of the dog's intervention had already spread beyond the building. Reporters were outside, buzzing like hornets. Camille entered the courtroom and walked straight to the evidence table. The box landed with a satisfying thump. "Your Honor," she said, locking eyes with Judge Briggs, "we have recovered substantial documentation that supports our fraud allegations against Mr. Dale. This key," she raised it again, "was the missing link. And this," she motioned to the papers, "proves it." Victor Wren was already on his feet. "Objection! Your Honor, this is a travesty. Evidence obtained from a stray dog? This violates every standard. It's a legally executed search," Judge Briggs said firmly. "The motion was granted under probable cause, and I'm admitting the evidence. Sit down, Mr. Wren." Franklin remained motionless, his eyes locked on the dog, still sitting calmly off to the side, watched over by a courthouse staffer. The judge turned to Camille. "Proceed." Camille opened a folder. "These documents show direct transfers from Dale Industries Community Fund to personal accounts under alias corporations, all linked to offshore banking institutions. Funds intended for local aid were rerouted to shell companies owned by the defendant." Silence fell over the courtroom. Camille continued, "Among the charities affected are Hopewell Youth Center, Meadowbridge Medical Research Fund, and Glenridge Housing Project. These weren't just accounts. These were lifelines for our city's most vulnerable. And Mr. Dale siphoned them for personal gain." Gasps rose. Even the jury members leaned forward, their expressions hardening. Franklin leaned into Victor, hissing under his breath, "You have to shut this down, now." Victor shook his head, visibly sweating. "Not unless you've got a miracle in your back pocket." Across the room, the dog lay quietly, ears perked, eyes locked on Franklin, as if still waiting for something more to unravel. Later that afternoon, the animal was temporarily placed in the care of Hillshade Animal Shelter, a nearby facility known for treating its strays with uncommon dignity. Staff at the shelter took one look at the dog and decided he needed a name. "I say we call him Valor," said a young volunteer named Gina. "That dog just changed the course of a trial." The name stuck. Valor didn't bark, didn't whimper. He simply lay on a cushion, his eyes wise and calm. A worker scratched behind his ears and said quietly, "It's like he knows what he did." Meanwhile, in the courtroom, Camille introduced more documents, each more damning than the last. Franklin's fraudulent transfers totaled over $18 million, money funneled through dummy accounts into luxury properties, private planes, and silent investments in foreign assets. Victor Wren tried to interject with objections, but Judge Briggs was relentless. "Ms. Rourke," the judge said, "you may continue tomorrow. We will reconvene at 9 a.m. Before court adjourned, Camille requested one more thing. "Your Honor, I'd like to make a motion." Briggs arched a brow. "Yes?" "I'd like to formally recognize the canine who delivered this key as a material factor in the uncovering of evidence. His actions directly led to the discovery of vital case material." "You want to add a dog to your witness list?" Camille smiled faintly. "Not exactly. But I want the court record to reflect his role. Without him, none of this would have surfaced." The judge looked toward Valor, resting peacefully beside a court officer. She gave a rare, thoughtful nod. "So ordered." And with that, the day's proceedings came to a close. But the real story, the deeper mystery, was only beginning. The following morning, Green Hollow's courthouse was already buzzing before the doors even opened. Word had spread like wildfire, not just about the trial, but about the stray dog who had become a symbol of justice overnight. Social media was flooded with hashtags like #VerdictDog, #ValorSpeaks, and #the key witness. But inside, the mood was far more serious. Judge Lenora Briggs arrived early, her usual composure tinged with an edge of personal curiosity. She still couldn't shake the image of that dog, sitting boldly in the courtroom as if he belonged there. No leash, no owner, yet holding the key to unraveling one of the most complex fraud cases in city history. Back in her chambers, she reread the preliminary reports from DA Camille Rourke, the boxes retrieved from the storage unit, the matching records of illicit wire transfers, even documents linking Franklin Dale to offshore accounts and fictitious names. Everything had the ring of certainty. And yet, the one thing Briggs couldn't legally explain was the dog. Valor, as he'd now been named, wasn't just a fluke in this case. He was central to it, and that was a problem for the defense. At 9 a.m. sharp, court resumed. Franklin Dale sat grim-faced beside Victor Wren, his top-dollar attorney, who now looked far less confident than in previous sessions. Wren shuffled paperwork, whispered strategy, and adjusted his tie for the third time in 5 minutes. Camille Rourke stood already poised at the prosecution table, a fresh binder of documentation ready at her side. Judge Briggs tapped her gavel. "Let's proceed." "Your Honor," Camille began, "today we present verified surveillance data, photographic evidence, and testimony from professionals who will confirm the defendant's routine visits to Everlock Storage. These records, matched with the documents recovered, establish an unbroken chain of activity that implicates Mr. Dale directly." Camille motioned toward the screen, where a large flat monitor had been set up. This first image was taken 2 months ago, time-stamped 1:47 a.m., showing Mr. Dale's personal vehicle arriving at the storage site. You'll see him unlocking the gate using a key identical to the one recovered from the dog, Valor. There were gasps in the audience. The jury members leaned in. Camille advanced to the next image, Franklin carrying what appeared to be a banker's box into the unit. "We have 12 such instances recorded over a period of 3 months," she continued, each coinciding with high-value transactions from Dale Industries' so-called charitable wing. Victor Wren finally stood. "Your Honor, the defense maintains that these visits were personal errands unrelated to the alleged crimes." Camille didn't flinch. "Then let's ask the man himself." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Officer Brenda Lorne, assigned to financial crimes investigation and surveillance." Officer Lorne took the stand, her navy uniform sharp, her voice steady. She confirmed she had trailed Franklin Dale personally on at least 4 of the occasions in question. "He always went alone," she said. "No paperwork, no company vehicle. We suspected he was storing sensitive material off-site, hence the court-approved surveillance." "And did you witness any unusual behavior during these visits?" Camille asked. Lorne nodded. "Yes. He never went during business hours, always at night. He was extremely cautious. Sometimes he circled the block before pulling into the facility." The judge allowed it, and the jury took careful note. Back in the gallery, spectators whispered among themselves. It was no longer just a theory. Franklin Dale had gone from suspect to center of a web of deception. Camille proceeded with a series of internal memos from Dale Industries, redacted emails, and 3 signed invoices traced to fake entities. Each item brought her closer to proving intent, something defense attorneys struggled to explain away. When the court recessed for lunch, the tension was thick enough to slice. At the same time, Hillshade Animal Shelter had a visitor, Camille Rourke. She had asked the judge for permission to meet Valor in a less formal setting. She wanted to understand him, not just as a symbolic figure, but as a creature who somehow pierced through layers of legal red tape and delivered the truth when humans had failed to. Inside the modest shelter, the staff greeted her warmly. "He's been quiet," said Gina, the volunteer. "Doesn't bark, eats when he wants, doesn't jump or misbehave, just watches." Camille approached the enclosure. Valor lay on a padded mat, eyes slowly blinking as she neared. She crouched to his level. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. "You knew exactly who to go to, and why." He didn't respond. Of course not. But he wagged his tail slowly and leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently into her hand. That one moment made Camille's throat tighten. "He's incredible," she murmured. "He's not chipped," Gina said. "No ID except the collar the key was on. No one's come to claim him either." Camille stood. "Someone will. I just have to find out who." She left with more than she came for. She left with a resolve. Back in the courtroom, the afternoon session took a darker turn. Camille presented testimony from Harvey Lynn, a forensic accountant, who walked the jury through a digital breadcrumb trail connecting Dale's shell companies to various stolen funds. As Harvey clicked through spreadsheets, financial transfers, and ghost accounts, Franklin's face reddened. He glanced at his lawyer repeatedly, his polished exterior beginning to crack. Victor Wren pushed back. "These transactions could have been made by any employee. There's no definitive proof my client personally executed them." Camille replied, "Then let's discuss this signature." She produced a scanned image showing Franklin's distinct signature on a transfer request, moving $1.2 million from a charity account into an entity registered in the Cayman Islands. "Is that not his name? In his handwriting?" she asked. Wren hesitated. "We would need handwriting verification," Camille cut in, "which we already have, and will present tomorrow." Franklin slumped slightly in his seat. Meanwhile, Camille continued planting seeds of doubt, not in the evidence, but in Franklin's ethics. "This isn't just white-collar theft," she said to the jury. "This is betrayal. These were funds donated for children without families, for cancer research, for affordable homes. Mr. Dale didn't just move numbers around. He stole hope." Later that evening, Camille sat at her desk, rereading the day's testimony. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. She couldn't shake the mystery of the dog. There was more to Valor. She could feel it in her bones. That's when her phone buzzed. It was a call from Hillshade Shelter. "Ms. Rourke, you may want to come back. We found something odd." Within the hour, Camille returned to the shelter. Gina met her at the door with a small silver tag in her hand. "We didn't see this before. It was under a layer of matted fur." Camille took it. The engraving was faded but legible. "Milo, if found, return to Ellis Grant, Route 17 Farmhouse." Ellis Grant. That name rang a bell. Camille nodded slowly. "I'll pay him a visit in the morning." The morning mist curled like smoke across the outskirts of Green Hollow, shrouding the rolling hills beyond city limits. District Attorney Camille Rourke drove along Route 17, her GPS leading her toward an isolated farmhouse tucked behind dense hedgerows and fields. She hadn't slept much, her mind looping endlessly around the name etched on Valor's hidden tag, Ellis Grant. Who was he? And how did this mysterious dog, Valor, or Milo as the tag suggested, go from a rural home to becoming the silent hero of a high-profile courtroom case. The dirt road crunched beneath her tires as she pulled up to a modest two-story farmhouse. It was aged but well-kept, with weathered red siding, a wraparound porch, and a tin-roofed barn in the distance. Chickens clucked somewhere out of view, and wind chimes rang softly in the breeze. Camille stepped out, the tag clutched in her hand. Before she could knock, the door opened. An elderly man stood there, tall and lean, his posture straight but shoulders burdened by years. His sharp blue eyes flicked from Camille's face to the tag in her palm. "You found him," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Camille nodded slowly. "Milo, is your dog?" "Was," the man replied, stepping aside to invite her in. "I thought I'd lost him for good." Inside, the farmhouse was simple, filled with books, old clocks, and hand-carved wooden furniture. The fireplace glowed faintly with coals from a morning fire. "My name's Ellis Grant," he said, gesturing to a wooden chair. "I'm a retired locksmith, been here most of my life. Milo came to me about 3 years ago. Smartest dog I ever met. Loyal to the bone. Saved me more than once when I was sick." Camille sat across from him. "How did you lose him?" "There was a storm back in early spring," Ellis said, his voice tight. "Fence came down. Milo got spooked and ran off. I looked for weeks, put up signs, called every shelter in the county. Nothing." Camille set the tag on the table. "Do you know how this key got attached to his collar?" Ellis picked it up, squinting at it. His face shifted from recognition to disbelief. I made this key. Years ago. Custom order. Engraved this ridge myself. I only ever made one like it." "For who?" Ellis rubbed his chin, thinking. "Man named Gavin Royston. Claimed he needed keys for a private storage unit. Paid in cash. Told me to keep quiet about it." Camille's heart thudded. "Gavin Royston," she repeated. "That was one of the fake identities used by Franklin Dale. You're telling me he hired you?" Ellis nodded. "Didn't know he was crooked. He seemed rich, maybe a little smug, but I didn't ask questions. Business was slow at the time." Camille stared at the key in her hand again. "Ellis, would you be willing to testify to this in court?" He hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "If it helps that dog, I'll do it." Back in Green Hollow, the courtroom prepared for another day of unraveling lies. Spectators filled the gallery, reporters stood shoulder to shoulder near the back, and the jury sat straighter than usual, eager for what the morning would reveal. Judge Lenora Briggs entered, taking her seat without fanfare. "Ms. Rourke," she said, "you may proceed." Camille rose. Today, the prosecution introduces Ellis Grant, a former locksmith and the man who cared for the dog now known as Valor, previously named Milo. His testimony will connect Franklin Dale directly to the physical key that led us to the Everlock storage evidence. Victor Wren immediately objected. "Your Honor, this is hearsay. A dog can't corroborate a chain of custody." Judge Briggs tilted her head. "I'll allow it. The court recognizes the unusual circumstances of this case. Proceed." Ellis took the stand, his weathered hands folded neatly as he answered Camille's questions. "Yes, I made that key," he said. "No doubt about it. My etching pattern is unique." "And who did you give it to?" "A man who called himself Gavin Royston." Camille handed Ellis a photograph. "Is this the same man?" Ellis stared at it. "That's him. May have changed his hair, but I never forget a face." Camille nodded. "The court will note for the record that the photo is of Franklin Dale, the defendant." Gasps spread through the room. Victor Wren approached for cross-examination. "Mr. Grant, you said this happened years ago. Couldn't your memory be flawed?" Ellis leaned forward. "Son, I've built locks since before you were born. I don't forget my work, and I sure as hell don't forget a man who paid me to keep quiet." Camille let that statement linger in the air before moving on to her next point: Valor's timeline. She walked the jury through the dog's journey, from the storm that caused him to flee, to his appearance at the courtroom weeks later, wearing the very key that would expose Franklin Dale. "We cannot explain every detail," she said, "but we can say with confidence that this dog, abandoned by fate and man alike, found his way into the very place where he was needed most." Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the courtroom, Valor sat next to a security officer, calm as ever. Every now and then, his eyes would drift to Franklin Dale, whose increasingly erratic behavior was drawing whispers. Franklin leaned toward Victor. "We need to shut this down. This dog is turning the jury against me." Victor frowned. "We can challenge his admissibility as evidence, but the people believe in the story. That's more powerful than anything I can counter with facts." Franklin bared his teeth. "Then give them a different story." And with that cryptic command, the defense team took a sudden and sharp turn in strategy. That afternoon, Victor requested a recess to introduce new evidence. With a reluctant nod from Judge Briggs, he presented a grainy video clip to the court. It showed a dog lunging aggressively at a man near a construction site. The footage, though unclear, was enough to stir unease. "This," Victor announced, "is your so-called hero, attacking a man in broad daylight. This is not a loyal animal. This is a threat." The courtroom buzzed with tension. Even the jury members looked confused. Camille remained still. Then she said, "I request a brief recess to verify the origins of this footage." The judge agreed. In the courthouse records room, Camille and her tech assistant, Alina, pored over metadata and digital watermarks. Within half an hour, they uncovered the truth. "It's edited," Alina confirmed. "The full video was from a security cam. The part they cut out? It shows a child walking onto the construction site, and Valor shielding them from falling debris. He wasn't attacking anyone. He was protecting the child." Camille returned to the courtroom, fire in her voice. "Your Honor," she said, "this video was manipulated to damage the perception of a key figure in this case. Here is the unedited version." She played it for the court. The room fell silent as the scene played out. A child, a dangerous moment, and a dog who put himself in harm's way to protect a life. When it ended, there was a beat of silence, then audible emotion from the jury box. Victor Wren sat down slowly, as if defeated by the weight of the truth. That night, Camille visited Hillshade again. Valor greeted her with a gentle bark and calm eyes. She sat beside him on the floor, fingers brushing through his thick fur. "You've carried more than any of us," she whispered. "And they tried to twist your story. But not anymore. I promise you that." As she scratched behind his ears, Valor leaned his head against her chest, and for a moment, Camille felt the burdens of the trial lift. Just a little. She knew they still had hurdles ahead. Franklin Dale was rich, connected, and dangerous. But they had truth, and they had valor. And in this case, that just might be enough. The trial of Franklin Dale had become more than a court case. It was now a public spectacle. By the fifth day, reporters camped outside the Green Hollow courthouse like it was an awards ceremony. Headlines used words like miraculous, unprecedented, and canine justice. Local papers splashed images of valor across their front pages, labeling him a hero, a witness, even a savior. Inside the courtroom, however, the tone remained solemn. Judge Lenora Briggs had imposed strict decorum, knowing full well the circus outside could seep into the halls of justice if she allowed it. Her gavel had become the voice of order in a trial that increasingly felt touched by fate. District Attorney Camille Rourke knew the emotional tide was on her side, but she also understood one crucial truth. Emotions alone wouldn't win this case. She needed facts, timelines, expert testimony, and more than anything, she needed to close every gap the defense could try to squeeze through. As court reconvened, Camille called her next witness, Detective Selena Hart, one of the lead investigators assigned to Dale Industries months before the trial ever began. Selena walked confidently to the stand, her blazer crisp, her tone measured. A veteran of over 20 years in law enforcement, she radiated credibility. Detective Hart, Camille began, can you walk us through your investigation into Franklin Dale's financial dealings? Selena nodded. We first noticed inconsistencies in charitable disbursement reports. Donations made by local citizens were not reflected in recipient organizations' ledgers. When we cross-referenced Dale Industries' statements, we found large sums redirected to untraceable third parties. Camille handed her a folder. And these third parties? Dummy corporations, shell accounts, all under names tied directly or indirectly to Franklin Dale. Most notably, an alias, Gavin Royston. The courtroom buzzed. Judge Briggs banged her gavel once. Quiet, please. Camille paced slowly. Is it true that you attempted to acquire a search warrant for storage properties linked to these shell companies? Yes, Selena replied. But we lacked a concrete link. Until the dog, Valor, entered the courtroom with the key to Unit 117B. Camille's voice rang with emphasis. So in essence, this evidence may have remained hidden if not for the intervention of an animal. Yes, ma'am. Victor Wren stood stiffly. Detective Hart, would you say your entire case rests on the actions of a dog? Selena didn't blink. The case was strong. The dog made it airtight. The jury exchanged looks, some nodding. Victor turned back toward Franklin, whose agitation grew with every passing minute. His knuckles were white from gripping the table. His empire was crumbling, and every effort to derail the case only seemed to cement Camille's narrative further. During the afternoon recess, Camille returned to her office down the block from the courthouse. On her desk sat a manila envelope marked Confidential, Internal Records. It had been delivered anonymously that morning. She opened it carefully. Inside were printed emails. They revealed that Dale Industries had been in communication with Canis Corp, a private canine training facility located several counties away. The correspondence went back 5 years. The content was alarming. One message, dated 3 years ago, read, Subject, termination of service. Dog number 114-M, Milo. Mr. Dale, following the failed security drill on your estate, dog number 114-M was deemed too emotionally reactive for high-stress environments. As per your request, we have released him from service. J. Beck, Director of Training, Canis Corp. Camille's stomach turned. Dog number 114-M, Milo, Valor. Franklin had owned him, trained him, and discarded him. And now that same dog had brought him to justice. Back in the courtroom, Camille introduced another witness. Dr. Adrienne Solis, a respected animal behaviorist with decades of field experience. Dr. Solis, Camille began, you've reviewed surveillance footage of Valor, his actions in court and during the construction site incident. Based on your expertise, can you speak to the likelihood of such behavior occurring randomly? Highly unlikely, Dr. Solis answered. Dogs don't perform complex tasks like delivering keys to strangers or targeting specific individuals without training or a strong emotional motive. Victor Wren leaned forward. So you're saying Valor's actions were premeditated? Not consciously, Solis said. But dogs operate on instinct, loyalty, and learned behavior. It's possible Valor associated Franklin Dale with something negative, abandonment perhaps, and sought resolution or justice. Do dogs seek justice? Victor asked sarcastically. Maybe not in human terms, she said, meeting his gaze. But in their own way, yes. They seek fairness, they remember kindness, and they remember betrayal. As the day wore on, Camille made a pivotal decision. She called Ellis Grant, the retired locksmith and Valor's former owner, back to the stand. I want the jury to understand the emotional toll behind this, she said. Ellis, steady despite his age, spoke gently. Milo, Valor. He wasn't just a stray, he was family. When he disappeared, I thought I'd failed him. I didn't know he was still out there, doing something no one else could. Camille asked, do you believe he knew what he was doing when he entered that courtroom? Ellis's eyes welled up. I do. Maybe not in legal terms, but he knew who had wronged him, and he knew who to bring the truth to. Across the aisle, Franklin Dale whispered furiously to Victor. We need to shift the jury's focus. We're losing them. Victor frowned. We've already tried discrediting the dog. We need something, anything that puts you in a more sympathetic light. That night, a video surfaced online. Posted from an anonymous account, it claimed to show behind-the-scenes footage of the prosecution team using Valor as a PR tool. Though clearly edited and voice-altered, the clip attempted to cast Camille's team as opportunists, exploiting a narrative for media gain. The defense filed a motion to present it the following morning. But Camille was ready. Her tech assistant, Alina, had already tracked the video's metadata. It originated from an IP linked to Dale's private estate, Alina said. Camille brought this to Judge Briggs, who seethed with fury at the manipulation. This is the third time, she said. First, the edited construction footage. Now this. If the defense continues submitting doctored evidence, I will hold them in contempt. Victor sat still, lips thin, realizing the tide could not be turned by dirty tactics. Camille used the moment to address the jury once more. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is no longer just about financial fraud. It's about character, about consequences, about what one man did behind closed doors, and what one dog did to bring it all to light. She turned toward Valor, who sat beside a court officer, quietly watching the proceedings. And whether or not you believe in fate or coincidence, you cannot ignore what he's shown us. That truth can come from the most unexpected places. The sun climbed higher over Green Hollow as the sixth day of the trial dawned, casting sharp light on the courthouse steps, where reporters huddled in anticipation. Every day brought more twists. Hidden identities, falsified evidence, a dog turned key witness, and the story had captured hearts across the country. Inside the building, tension was even thicker. The jury's expressions had grown more skeptical toward the defense. Judge Lenora Briggs entered the courtroom like a force of nature, her black robe trailing behind her like a storm cloud. Her patience with the defense team was thinning, and it showed in every clipped syllable. At the prosecution table, Camille Rourke reviewed a newly compiled timeline. Every piece of evidence, witness, and document now connected in a web that pointed straight to one man, Franklin Dale. As the trial resumed, Camille stood with calm authority. Your Honor, today we'll present evidence from the defendant's estate, including artifacts and digital records retrieved under warrant. We'll also call an investigator who recovered personal items linked to Canis Corp and Dale Industries. Franklin's lawyer, Victor Wren, was already on edge. His attempts to discredit Valor had backfired, and the anonymous video he submitted yesterday had been traced directly back to Franklin's own property. Judge Briggs had made it clear, "One more stunt, and I will hold your client in contempt." Camille's voice rang out confidently. The prosecution calls Detective Elena Ruiz to the stand. A tall, sharp-eyed woman approached, her badge glinting as she raised her hand for the oath. Once sworn in, she described what her team had found during a sweep of Dale's countryside estate. Behind the main house, we found a locked outbuilding, reinforced and camouflaged behind dense hedges, she said. Using the key retrieved from Valor, we opened the door and discovered storage trunks, business records, and items listed as stolen by charitable organizations over the past 2 years. She walked the jury through her findings, itemized lists of luxury goods purchased using foundation funds, forged receipts, and more damning, digital logs. Camille produced printed screenshots of these logs. Detective Ruiz, what are we looking at? Internal communications between Dale and his finance team. The most disturbing thread involves a strategy to hide funds using rotating canine security teams under Canis Corp contracts. The room stilled. Camille nodded slowly. And were any specific dogs mentioned? Yes, said Ruiz. Dog number 114-M, designated Milo. A photo was submitted into evidence. Valor, during his early days at Dale's estate, wearing a tactical harness and standing beside a Canis Corp handler. Camille paused before continuing. And what became of this dog, according to the records? Ruiz didn't hesitate. He was marked as disposed of. That word cracked through the silence like a whip. In the gallery, Ellis Grant sat motionless. Valor lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, unaware that the courtroom was now learning just how close he'd come to being discarded as worthless. Camille's next move was risky, but necessary. She stood again. Your Honor, I'd like to request a recess so that we may call to the stand a surprise witness who's come forward this morning. This witness worked under Mr. Dale and has first-hand knowledge of the defendant's use of trained animals in his operations. Victor Wren sputtered. Objection! This is a surprise witness. We've received no disclosure. The witness contacted us today, Camille said firmly. Given the urgency and relevance, I believe their testimony will directly impact the jury's understanding of the case. Judge Briggs narrowed her eyes, then gave a slow nod. I'll allow it. Proceed after the recess. Outside the courtroom, Camille met the woman in a side office. She looked to be in her 20s, with tired eyes and nervous hands twisting the strap of her bag. Her name was Clara Vance, a former administrative assistant at Dale Industries. I can't stay silent anymore, Clara said, her voice trembling. I worked for Mr. Dale for 3 years. I saw everything. The fake charities, the offshore accounts, the dogs. Camille leaned in. What about the dogs? They were trained to perform deliveries, Clara said. Not just documents, sometimes cash or sensitive hard drives. We used them to avoid traceable methods. But if a dog failed, if it got scared, disobeyed, or hesitated, he had them dismissed. Dismissed how? Clara looked down. Abandoned, sometimes worse. When court resumed, Camille called Clara to the stand. The courtroom held its breath as she approached, her voice low but steady. Ms. Vance, what was your role at Dale Industries? I managed internal logistics, shipment schedules, document retrievals, that sort of thing. And were you aware of Mr. Dale's connection to Canis Corp? Yes. I scheduled the deliveries. I saw the invoices. Some dogs were brought in, trained for specific missions. Valor, Milo, was one of them. And what happened to him? He failed a delivery during a storm. He panicked. Mr. Dale told us to get rid of him, said he was useless, that he wouldn't tolerate weakness. Clara's eyes found Valor, still resting quietly beside Ellis. He didn't deserve that. Victor Wren rose to cross-examine. Ms. Vance, is it possible you're simply a disgruntled ex-employee? No, she said. I stayed silent because I was scared. But when I saw him, when I saw Milo bring that key to court, I knew I had to speak. Victor tried to rattle her with accusations, but the jury had already made up their minds. The emotional weight of her testimony was undeniable. Camille took the opportunity to address them directly. This is who Franklin Dale is, she said. A man who saw animals not as companions, but as tools. And when those tools broke or failed, he tossed them away. But what he couldn't predict was that one of them would come back. That night, Camille returned to her office long after the courthouse had emptied. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat in the dim light, reviewing every note, every piece of evidence, and every moment from the past week. The case was strong, rock solid now, but it had become something more than just a legal battle. It had become a story of redemption, not for Franklin, but for Valor, for Clara, for Ellis, and maybe even for Camille herself. She looked out the window toward the courthouse, glowing faintly under streetlights. One more day, she thought. One more day, and justice will be done. By the 7th day of the trial, the Green Hollow courthouse felt less like a place of law and more like the heart of a reckoning. The building itself, with its towering marble columns and echoing hallways, had become the stage for one of the most gripping public dramas in recent memory. Inside, anticipation buzzed through the corridors like static. The media frenzy surrounding the case had only grown. Now, national outlets had joined the locals. Cameras rolled as people gathered outside, holding signs with slogans like "Justice for Milo" and "The dog who told the truth." Children clutched plush toy German shepherds, and elderly couples came out just to catch a glimpse of the courtroom hero. But inside, things were reaching their boiling point. Judge Lenora Briggs called the courtroom to order, her voice sharp and commanding. She knew today's proceedings would be pivotal and potentially volatile. "Counsel," she said sternly, "this court is prepared to hear the defense's next motion." Victor Wren, once so polished and self-assured, now looked like a man grappling with defeat. He stood slowly. "Your Honor, the defense calls Franklin Dale to the stand." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Camille Rourke narrowed her eyes. She had anticipated this move. The defense was desperate. Having failed to discredit the evidence, the witnesses, and even the dog, they were now making a final gamble, letting the accused speak for himself. Franklin walked to the witness box like a man walking a tightrope. His suit was crisp, his expression contrite, but his eyes still shimmered with calculation. After swearing in, Victor began softly. "Mr. Dale, tell us who you are. Not as the media sees you, but as you see yourself." Franklin offered a weary smile. I'm a businessman, a father, a community leader, someone who's made mistakes. Yes, but also someone who's done good for this town. Victor nodded. And these charges, this story about hidden keys, secret storage units, and a stray dog, what do you make of it? Franklin took a deep breath. I think it's a tragedy, that a misunderstanding has snowballed into a witch hunt. I didn't embezzle money. I didn't create false charities. I certainly didn't send a dog into a courtroom to frame myself. A few jurors raised their eyebrows. Others remained still. Camille stood. Your Honor, may I begin my cross-examination? Proceed, Judge Briggs replied. Camille approached the stand with the calm of someone who had already won. Mr. Dale, she said evenly, you claim to have made mistakes. Can you specify one? Franklin hesitated. I should have hired better people. I trusted the wrong individuals. And who specifically were these individuals? Accountants, mostly. Legal teams who managed our offshore business interests. Camille tilted her head. Are these the same legal teams who filed expense reports under the alias Gavin Royston? Franklin's mouth tightened. Camille continued. Because our investigation revealed that Gavin Royston shares your signature, your photo ID, and your handwriting. He said nothing. You were seen entering a private storage facility a dozen times, always alone, carrying boxes. Surveillance places your car there. Your access code unlocked the unit. And inside? Documents with your signature. That doesn't prove criminal intent, he snapped. Camille raised a brow. Then let's talk about dog number 114-M. The courtroom fell silent. Also known as Milo. Also known as Valor. A dog you trained through Canis Corporation. A dog you abandoned. Franklin sat rigid. You called him defective, said he failed a mission, ordered him to be disposed of. Your own words. Victor objected. Your Honor, this line of questioning... Sustained, Briggs said, but then turned to Dale. Mr. Dale, you may answer the question if you choose. Franklin's voice turned icy. He was a tool. He didn't work. That's all. The gallery murmured. Camille leaned closer. He was never just a tool. He found the key that led us to your hidden records. He brought it here, to this courtroom. And somehow, he knew exactly who you were. She turned to the jury. That dog showed more loyalty than you ever did to your community. That evening, the courthouse was quieter than usual. The press had dispersed, unsure of how to spin what had unfolded. Franklin's testimony hadn't helped him. It had only solidified what many suspected: guilt wrapped in arrogance. Camille walked slowly toward Hillshade Shelter, where Valor was temporarily housed during court breaks. As she entered, she was greeted by soft barking and the hum of classical music. Gina, the young shelter worker, smiled. He's been waiting for you, she said. Camille found Valor lying near the office, his head on his paws. He lifted it when he saw her, ears twitching. She sat down beside him. They're starting to see the truth, she whispered. And it's because of you. Valor didn't move. He just watched her, eyes calm and deep. Camille reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, newly engraved tag. It read, Valor for courage without words and loyalty without limit. I had it made, she said, for whatever comes next. The following day, Judge Briggs announced that closing arguments would begin. The courtroom filled quickly. Jurors took their seats, pens ready. Spectators leaned forward. Camille stood, every step deliberate. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, this trial has shown you the lengths one man would go to hide the truth. and the incredible, improbable way that truth finally came to light. She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the courtroom. This wasn't just fraud, it was betrayal. Money meant for children, for medical research, for shelters like Hillshade, was stolen. Lives were affected, programs shut down, all because Franklin Dale wanted more. She gestured toward Valor, seated beside Ellis Grant. But where the human system failed, this dog succeeded. Not because he had to, but because something inside him refused to stay silent. Camille walked slowly toward the jury. You've seen the documents, you've heard the witnesses, and you've watched as the man responsible for all of it tried to twist the narrative. He called the dog a tool. He blamed everyone but himself. She took a breath. I ask you now to see past his suit, his charm, his money. See the man who cast aside loyalty when it no longer served him, and the dog who carried that loyalty all the way to this courtroom. Victor's closing was half-hearted. He spoke of doubt, of technicalities, of how a key could have changed hands a dozen times. But his voice lacked conviction. The jury listened politely but unmoved. That evening, as the courthouse emptied, Camille walked with Ellis and Valor under the fading light. The town was quieter now, as if holding its breath. Ellis looked down at the dog. He's always known what's right, even when we didn't. Camille nodded. Tomorrow the jury decides, but I think his part is already done. She knelt, placing the new tag gently on Valor's collar. He licked her hand, his tail thumping once against the stone steps. Thank you, she whispered. For a moment, everything was still. The morning of the 8th day arrived with a quiet intensity. The town of Green Hollow had spent the night on edge. News anchors stood outside the courthouse in crisp suits and long coats, their breaths fogging in the cool morning air as they repeated the same phrase. Today, the jury will announce their verdict in the trial of Franklin Dale. Inside the building, courtroom staff moved with measured silence, as if any sudden noise might shake the balance of fate. The jury had been sequestered overnight, and the court awaited their decision with the reverence of a final breath before a leap. Judge Lenora Briggs sat at the bench earlier than usual, her expression unreadable, but her fingers clasped tightly together. At the prosecution table, Camille Rourke double-checked her closing notes, though she knew nothing more could be said. At the defense table, Victor Wren stared blankly ahead. He looked 10 years older than he had at the start of the trial. Beside him sat Franklin Dale, unmoved, stone-faced, a man trying to look dignified as the walls around him caved in. And beside the jury box, calm, quiet, and loyal as ever, was Valor. His presence had been allowed for this final session at Camille's request. The judge had agreed. He's part of the truth, she had said. He should be here when it's spoken. A door opened. 12 jurors walked in, their faces marked by solemnity. No eye contact, no expressions. Just the stillness of people who had made a decision that would change a man's life, and perhaps a town's future. The bailiff took the envelope from the jury foreman and handed it to Judge Briggs. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the lines before she nodded. She handed the paper back and turned to the jury. Will the foreman please stand? A middle-aged man with a gray mustache rose, holding the verdict slip in one hand. Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? We have, Your Honor. And how do you find the defendant, Franklin Dale, on the charge of wire fraud? Guilty. A hush. On the charge of embezzlement? Guilty. On the charge of misuse of charitable funds? Guilty. Each word hit like a drumbeat. Camille felt her shoulders finally drop. A weight she didn't realize she'd been carrying lifted slowly, like the final strand of a tether being released. Franklin said nothing. He didn't blink. He just stared at the table in front of him like it had betrayed him. Victor Wren closed his eyes. Judge Briggs addressed the court. The jury is dismissed with the court's deepest thanks for your service. As the jurors filed out, Valor rose from his spot and looked at Camille, then toward Franklin. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just stared for a long, steady moment, calm, quiet, unflinching. Franklin met the dog's eyes, and for the first time during the entire trial, he looked afraid. The judge turned to the rest of the courtroom. Sentencing will occur in 30 days. Until then, the defendant is to be remanded into custody without bail. Two officers moved toward Franklin, who stood slowly, as if resisting would be pointless. He said nothing as he was handcuffed and led out the side door. The same door Valor had entered from, weeks ago. Only now, the courtroom felt different, whole. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the Green Hollow skyline, the courthouse remained open just a little longer. A special ceremony had been arranged. Quiet, informal, but meaningful. Camille, Ellis Grant, Judge Briggs, a few staff members, and shelter volunteers gathered in the main atrium. There was no press, no reporters, just those who had walked the path together. In Camille's hands was a certificate, the city's official recognition of Valor as a public service animal. It wasn't just honorary. It came with protections, permanent care sponsorship, and his adoption into Ellis Grant's household. Judge Briggs stepped forward. "This court has seen many unusual things," she said. "But never a witness with 4 legs and a deeper understanding of justice than many people I've sentenced." Soft chuckles followed. She looked at Valor. "You reminded us that integrity doesn't wear a suit. Sometimes it comes on 4 tired paws, with no voice but still a message that cannot be ignored." Ellis knelt beside the dog, fastening the newly engraved tag Camille had made days earlier. Valor for courage without words and loyalty without limit. There were tears in Camille's eyes. "I've seen prosecutors, detectives, and experts take down the corrupt," she said. "But I've never seen anyone, any being, do what you did. You gave us the one clue that made everything else possible." Gina from the shelter brought over a soft collar made of dark leather and steel rivets. Sturdy, comfortable, designed for Valor to wear for the rest of his life. Ellis fastened it gently. Valor licked his hand and lay down, tail wagging. In the days that followed, Green Hollow returned to its rhythms, but something had shifted. The courthouse placed a bronze plaque outside courtroom 3. It read, "On this site, the truth came from an unexpected source. In honor of Valor, the dog who delivered justice." City of Green Hollow. A small stone statue of Valor was commissioned to be placed in the town square, near the fountain. Children gathered there, pointing, laughing, taking photos. Parents told them the story, how a stray dog helped convict a man who thought himself above the law. Back at Ellis Grant's farmhouse, life settled into a new rhythm. Valor had his own bed near the fireplace, a yard to run in, and a man who loved him like family. One evening, Camille visited, bringing fresh bread and a stack of thank you letters from children at local schools who had followed the case. "They've drawn pictures," she laughed. "Some made you into a superhero." Ellis chuckled. "He is one." As they sat on the porch drinking tea, Valor rested between them, his head on Camille's shoe. You ever think about how strange this all is? She asked. How a key on a dog's collar turned into the linchpin of one of the biggest fraud cases we've seen. Ellis nodded. I think about it every day. I used to believe the world was too broken to fix, that the little things didn't matter. And now? Now I know they do. One act of loyalty changed everything. Camille looked down at Valor and smiled. Yeah, it did. Sometime later, Hillshade Shelter launched a program in Valor's name. The Valor Initiative, aimed at training rescued dogs for search, recovery, and therapy work. Donations poured in. Formerly abandoned dogs found homes, purpose, and new beginnings. In his quiet way, Valor had opened a door not just to truth, but to healing. He never needed to say a word. He simply walked through a courtroom door, held his ground, and pointed, without hesitation, at the man who had once discarded him. And in doing so, he reminded everyone that justice isn't about noise, or drama, or even speeches. Sometimes justice barks only once, and that's enough.